Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you're joining us today. My name is Cecile Fruin, and I am the Director of Regional Integration Engagement for South Asia at the World Bank. I'm delighted to be your host today and to welcome you to the inaugural webinar of the One South Asia series. We will convene regularly around issues of regionalism in South Asia, because we believe that dialogue and knowledge platforms are powerful mechanisms to foster trust and to enable collective action. In today's webinar, we will be focusing on a very current and topical issue. We will discuss how regional cooperation can support countries in their COVID-19 recovery efforts. We know that the nations of South Asia are facing daunting challenges and that they are a critical moment. Will they collaborate to maximize resources and impact during and after the COVID pandemic? Or will they be tempted in an effort to protect their own, to turn inward and to resort to domestic policies and solutions? We are very fortunate to have a distinguished panel with us today to share their views on these very questions. I'm delighted to welcome our Vice President for South Asia, Mr. Hartwig Schaefer, and experts from Bangladesh, India, and Nepal, who have been champions of regional integration work in South Asia. I want to take this opportunity to thank them very much for their continued support of the World Bank South Asia Regional Integration Program. In future events, we will bring in voices from other countries in the region. Now let me introduce our speakers. Mr. Hartwig Schaefer, known as Hart, became the World Bank's Vice President for the South Asia region in July 2018. In managing the World Bank's engagement in South Asia to end extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity, he leads relations with the 8 SAARC countries and is a strong advocate for regional integration. He manages a portfolio of financial support worth more than $50 billion. Dr. Rubana Haq is a businesswoman and a poet. While she is the first female president of the Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association, she is quick to point out that she is the first occupant of the post who has a PhD. She is also the managing director of Mohammadi Group, a family business conglomerate whose journey began exporting ready-made garments and has since diversified into software, digital distribution, real estate, power generation, and the group's latest is the launch of a television channel called Nagorik. The distinguished Ambassador Sham Saran is a former Foreign Secretary of India and has served as chairman of the National Security Advisory Board under the National Security Council and as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Nuclear Affairs and Climate Change. After leaving government service in 2010, he has headed the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, a prestigious think tank focusing on economic issues, and is currently member of the governing board of the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi. Last but not least, Dr. Swarnim Waghli chairs the Institute for Integrated Development Studies, a South Asian policy think tank. Between 2014 and 2018, Swarnim served in the National Planning Commission in the government of Nepal, first as a member and then as a vice chair, with rank equivalent to minister. He has worked as an international development professional for more than 15 years, with policy assignments in over 20 countries. Let me remind participants that you can pose questions via live chat, and we will come to them later in this session. I would now like to welcome our Vice President, Hart Schaefer, to provide his opening remarks.
Very much, Cecile. Distinguished members of the panel, all participants, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I hope that you are safe, you and your loved ones are staying safe, keeping safe, because particularly at this time when we are looking at the South Asia region with great concerns, as in some countries the numbers are still exponentially growing, while other countries seem to have plateaued and flattened. But if we think back 6 months ago, 8 months ago, we would have never thought that domestic lockdowns are going to freeze the economies across South Asia. 6 months, 8 months ago, we would have never thought that the trajectory that South Asia was in as the fastest growing region would be abruptly turned into the opposite. What we expect right now is that 2020 will result in an economic decline of 2.7% in real terms. That's the worst economic outturn in 4 decades. And it is, instead of a 5 to 6% increase, it is a negative growth. The World Bank never thought 6 months, 8 months ago that we would be spending 6 billion last year on fighting the COVID response. And that is only a small share of what we could be doing. But the team stepped up very quickly in the first phase to support every one of the 8 countries with a healthcare project to bolster testing capacity, provide personal protective equipment, have campaigns to get people to accept social distancing and so on. And then we moved to support the small and micro and medium enterprise sector, which employs so many people and is so important for economies that are to a large degree informal. And now we are looking at how can we help countries recover and rebuild better, with better resilience, more sustainability, and so on. And I think this is something that we'll discuss today. How can we make COVID-19 from being a challenge? How can we make it an opportunity to build back better and allow South Asian economies to reconnect to the trajectory of 5 to 6% growth per annum, which is totally possible and which is needed in order to lift the population out of poverty and to achieve greater equality. But why are we talking about this in the context of collaboration across boundaries? Well, first of all, we know that diseases, cyclones, monsoons, earthquakes, they don't stop at borders. So it is important that we are looking at these natural disasters, at pandemics, as something that goes across borders and that we work together across national boundaries. But we also know that the economies will be more resilient and will grow faster if there is trade across borders. And COVID has all but shut down many of the borders between countries, and the nascent trade that happened in these border areas has been stopped. So we need to look at what can be done to open those borders up so that the population on both sides of the border is actually benefiting. We also need to look at supply chains. In today's day and age, supply chains cross national boundaries. And we have seen that in some countries that supply chains have been disrupted. So what does it take? What does a new design of supply chains and agreements entail to make sure that supply bottlenecks are mitigated or avoided? We also need to talk about the digital economy. We have seen that so many children now, as the school year starts, are going to work from home, just like we do, to get educated in the living room or in a spare office at home, or together with their parents sitting at the same dining room table, one working on a World Bank project, the other the kids learning from home. So digital technology is becoming even more important than we thought it would be 6 to 8 months ago. And we need to look at, do we have the environment, the regulatory environment in place? Do we actually have the physical infrastructure in place to make sure that reliable and affordable intranet is available for everybody? So that makes it very important. And the last point, a case for regional collaboration, is to share data. I think the sum of the national wealth of data that is there when it comes to managing pandemics, when it comes to helping track some of the key vital indicators, whether it is air pollution or the pollution of the marine environment, it is important that we actually share that data, because that makes it more valuable, and it also allows us to make better policy changes and so on. I'm passionate about regional collaboration for several reasons. I grew up in Germany, and I was born in 1958. That was around the time when the foundation for the European Union was laid between 2 countries, France and Germany, 10 years after the Second World War. But there was the steel and coal sector that was actually something on both sides of the border. And the 2 countries realized that if they were going to combine forces, join forces in this sector, there would be a win-win for the population on both sides. And that laid the foundation for the European Union, which now is 70 years later, is a union of 27 countries. So for me, regional collaboration starts small. Regional collaboration starts by being opportunistic to look at win-win situations. And this is what the World Bank has been doing over the last 10 years. We started with a regional integration department that Cecile is now heading in South Asia. And we have made significant progress. In the western part of the region, we have power trade and power connectivity between Central Asia and South Asia. The CASA 1000 is one of those mega transmission projects that connects two subregions. In the eastern part of South Asia, we of course have the cross-border transmission capacity between Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Bhutan is part of this as well. So we are working on areas where we know that for this subgroup of countries, there is a win-win situation. And I'm very proud that we are also addressing one of the topics that are very important now, that is marine plastics. Rivers are going through several countries in South Asia and then are feeding into the Bay of Bengal. And this is probably one of the areas where we have the highest plastic pollution, marine plastic pollution. And this is a problem that cannot be tackled by one country. And just last year, we launched a program that brings all the countries together in South Asia and addresses this very important issue. And I hope that eventually, in the not too distant future, we can also look at airshed management. Air pollution is, again, it's a global public bad that doesn't stop at boundaries, and it cannot be addressed by one country alone. So what I expect today from this discussion is to really look at regional collaboration, regional integration, collaboration between countries in a sub-region through the lens of COVID. This is really new. If we had this discussion 6 to 8 months ago, we would have approached it in a different way. Now we are dealing with COVID, and I think we know that COVID is going to be with us for the foreseeable future. But we also have hope that there will be a vaccine. We have hope that it will be contained. It will allow the opening up of borders. It will allow for traffic of goods and people. It will allow for tourism to bounce back in countries like Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bhutan, but also, of course, India and Nepal. And this is something, again, if we had a group of countries that would subscribe to the same entry requirements, tourists could not only visit one country, but could go from one country to the next. All this has to be done by keeping COVID in mind. But I would like to hear from our panelists, but also from others, what is it, where can we actually make an opportunity out of the challenges that COVID poses, and how can we make sure that this helps the countries of South Asia to build back better, to be more resilient, and make sure that the people of South Asia actually are benefiting from this, because they deserve no less. Thank you very much, Cecile.
Thank you very much, Hart. Thank you for reiterating the World Bank's commitment to this agenda. And let me just say that in response to COVID, we have updated our World Bank's approach to South Asia regional integration, cooperation, engagement, which we refer to affectionately as RICE. This approach was updated with the vision and belief that greater regional cooperation will enhance prospects for inclusive growth, sustainable development, and building a resilient Asia. We have 3 thematic focus areas. The first is in enabling economic connectivity. The second is around reducing vulnerabilities and building resilience, something that Hart just referred to, and also investing in human capital, in education and health and social protection. The 2 first areas have been our focus for the past 10 years. The third area, human capital, is one that we will be investing much more in going forward, and very much in response to the pandemic. We support this agenda through producing robust and relevant analytical work, by convening key stakeholders through dialogue platforms, investing in transformational regional projects along the lines of what Hart just discussed, and helping to build capacity and systems. We know that this work is a marathon, it's not a sprint, and it requires patience, perseverance, and pragmatism. And it requires working very closely with all of our stakeholders in the region. We've benefited in this endeavor from the support of DFID UK, DFAT Australia, and Norway, who have supported us with innovative and pioneering activities in the region. So it's now time that I turn to our panel. Please keep on sending questions, but let me start with a few of my own. So the first question I'm going to address to all of our panelists, and this is a big picture question. I would like to hear from each of you, what are your views on how regional cooperation and integration can support social and economic recovery post-COVID in the region? Ambassador Saran, you've been publishing quite extensively on this topic, so I'll start with you.
Well, thank you very much, Cecil, and I would like to also thank Vice President Hartwig Schaefer for also attending this panel discussion. The leadership of World Bank being behind this regional cooperation initiative is very significant. I think, going forward, this will make a big difference in terms of how successful we are in taking this initiative forward. So thank you for arranging this conversation. Now, with regard to the social and economic recovery post-COVID-19, I think we should begin by acknowledging that at this moment of what is really a twin crisis, it is a public health crisis, but at the same time, it is an economic crisis. Both of these are coinciding together. But even though the logic of dealing with these challenges through greater regional cooperation, by trying to have coordinated responses to these crises, we are not able to actually mobilize that, mainly because there are renewed political tensions, and we see a somewhat rising confrontation amongst some of the countries of South Asia. It is reflected mainly, for example, in India's relations with Pakistan on the one hand, but also more recently, we see some tensions appearing in India's relations with Nepal, also perhaps even though there has been very positive development in India-Bangladesh relations over the last decade or so, but even there, perhaps there are some new issues which may be arising. So we have to deal with this issue facing this political reality. And the question is, if this is the political reality, does the COVID-19 pandemic and the seriousness of this crisis offer us some opportunity to be able to alter these negative trends, since no meaningful regional cooperation or integration is really possible without at least a minimal level of trust and confidence among the countries of the region. That is just the reality that we face. So I will address these two issues, in somewhat different levels. One, I think it is very clear that what COVID-19 is bringing to the surface is the very serious erosion of the planetary ecology, which has led to the eruption of this pandemic. Not many people actually make the link between the ecological crisis and the pandemic, but actually they are very, very closely related. It is because the forest habitats of the animal kingdom are shrinking alarmingly. We are bringing domesticated animals and humans, as well as the wild animals, in closer contact with one another. The wilder species are coming in contact with human settlements, and this is what is resulting in the multiplication of these very, very dangerous viruses amongst human populations. And this is the reason why the pandemic has erupted. So there is a direct connection between what is happening with respect to ecological degradation and the public health crisis that we are facing. It's important to understand that linkage. And South Asia is actually one of the most ecologically integrated regions of the world. It has very rich biodiversity, but this is fragile and it is under threat. And now this is a challenge which obviously can only be dealt with close regional cooperation. There is really no alternative to this. And failure to respond collectively will expose peoples of all the countries in the region to huge risk. And we can already see from the impact of the pandemic what those risks could be. So the political issues that preoccupy South Asian countries currently, however important they may seem at this point of time, actually could be rendered quite irrelevant in the face of these risks to the very survival of our people. That's just the inescapable reality in a sense. So this awareness needs to be spread not only amongst leaders but also people of the region, because ultimately, you need to mobilize public opinion, political opinion in our countries in support of regional cooperation. And I think this is a very good moment when we are coming face to face with this kind of crisis, that perhaps there will be greater receptivity to the message that we are trying to give. Secondly, in the near term, and from the Indian perspective, here are some of the ways in which the regional agenda could be advanced in dealing with the twin crisis. What is it in terms of opportunity that this crisis offers? So once a effective vaccine becomes available, there will obviously be a very major challenge in enabling its large-scale production and distribution among the 1.5 billion people of South Asia. So that's a huge number that we are talking about in terms of the inoculation exercise that you need to carry out. Now, here, India has one of the largest production capacities for vaccine production in the world, which could be mobilized for use throughout South Asia. So an effective distribution plan may need to be developed using both government and non-governmental mechanisms in all our various countries. And the World Bank, under its South Asia Rice Initiative, could very well assist in developing such a regional plan. This could be a very important role because you have that convening power as well. And secondly, once economic recovery begins, we have to look at what are the ways in which, again, from the Indians' perspective, what could we contribute to the regional dimension? And here I would like to point out that India has very large and comfortable foreign exchange reserves, which may enable swap facilities for South Asian neighbors who are facing a lot of balance of payments pressures at this very point of time. So this is one aspect. And if India is looking at, and I see a lot of conversation taking place amongst our policymakers, that we need to be able to put in place more resilient supply chains, more domestic supply chains in respect of some very, very important and sensitive goods. Now, if we are looking at some kind of a reshoring, is it possible to think of reshoring not only into India, but really in terms of a regional supply chain, where some components of those supply chains could be perhaps located in not just in India, but in some of the neighboring countries. This could be, for example, in pharmaceuticals. It could be in electronics. Could these be, designed as South Asia supply chains? And in a period of rising protectionism and shrinking overseas markets, the regional South Asia free trade area could be revived in this crisis, because it could become, in fact, the lifeline for the region. So all South Asian countries are facing economic recession. They are facing rise in poverty and unemployment. There is the IDET crisis of migrant labor, both from cities to rural areas, but also from foreign countries where a large number of people from South Asia are living and working back to our home countries. Now, these can be, again, tackled much more effectively if it is a more regionally coordinated initiative. So convening a group of eminent economists or policymakers from our countries to perhaps undertake this exercise may help to refocus attention on the regional dimension. And this is where I think the World Bank can play a very important role in being able to convene some of this resources that are available in the region. So since India has already taken the lead in convening a virtual South Asian summit, which I think is a good step forward, it also provides a certain opening, even in this rather challenging political environment, to perhaps enable us to do some, even if it is, as Hart said, even modest initiatives. If it opens the door for even some modest steps forward, it would be very worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Saran. Let me turn over to Rubana for the same question.
Thank you, Cecile. It's been a great pleasure being part of the South Asian Champions round, that's for sure. So thank you, World Bank, for always being the initiator for One South Asia. Though often, we use this second or third track to get together and do this together, it's also true that behind closed doors, we also speak very, very openly and frankly about what's really lacking. And with every meeting, we've just come up with one phrase: there is a trust deficit in this entire region. And in times of COVID, when there's a severe crisis, while all the nations do look inward, it's also important to understand that no one single country can act in isolation. So India, thanks to Ambassador Swaran for pointing out all the details, India, as big as it is, cannot afford to act in isolation forever. And it cannot be, a mantra of self-reliant India, make for the world slogan, which is actually going on now. So the term now is Atma Nirbhar Bharat. So self-sufficient, self-dependent, independent Bharat. So this cannot be the case going forward, because while Ambassador Swaran also talked about reshoring, it cannot be individual reshoring. It has to be regional reshoring. So with that in mind, I don't want to begin with a negative note, but there have been rising tensions about different issues. For instance, we used to enjoy, from the manufacturing point of view, from the exporting point of view, we used to enjoy duty-free to India. But we've heard recent rumors that, that's going to be completely revoked at some point. There are para-tariffs, and, there are so many other issues. There are lots of non-tariff barriers that impede our growth. But, we don't expect such a hit at this point of time when we are barely recovering from COVID. So if there's one thing that we have, if there's one thing that we all have in common, is the common call for bridging this trust deficit, which does not seem to be getting better these days anyway. And also, like if we talk only about the manufacturing bit, the Bangladesh-India bit only, the bilateral trade is actually up to $8.62 billion. And, Bangladesh has a trade deficit of over $7.75 billion. Our export to India has just nominally risen to about $1.1 billion from 800 and something. So it's just marginal. Whereas considering that India has a retail market size of 60 billion US, and it has a projected growth rate of almost 18% annually. Considering, there's a growing middle class, there's a lot of spending on clothing and other items, and of course, there's a huge proximity issue. So instead of taking advantage of that, India cannot just, stand alone and say that we're going to make everything ourselves, because here ourselves is basically One South Asia. We have complementarities to offer, and there are lots of areas where we can collaborate and move on. And I can only say, it's been a success story so far. In the last 10 years, the bilateral trade between Bangladesh and India has grown by almost 45%. 45 times, I'm sorry. So from a bare minimum of $11 million to almost $500 million in just 10 years. So it's important for us so that this keeps on going. And, as far as manufacturing, apparel manufacturing is concerned, we've been losing unit value to India. If we take a 4-year CAGR, we've lost unit value by 1.62%. And our volume has gone up by 5.81%. So volume's going up, prices are going down. And we also have to understand there has to be a supply chain collaboration. India literally has a $150 billion worth of textile market. Where do we figure out there? Are we contributing enough? Now, Bangladesh can remain an open market for India. India exports almost $16 billion just worth of textile and of course other things. So my point is, instead of Bangladesh being so vulnerable about what India is currently thinking, it's time that we carve out a regional narrative through well-meaning friends like World Bank and move forward, because by the look of it right now, it's not looking good. And post LDC, when Bangladesh graduates, then it'll become even more difficult if we don't have a collaboration right now, because then we will be slapped back with a 10% import duty. So SAFTA should remain vibrant and open and of course flexible. So if there's one ask that we have, that's the regional value creation should be our primary focus. So regional value creation and growth through collaborative market focus, and also we have to probably collaboratively concentrate on East Asia now, and think of ASEAN as our target market. So in terms of collaboration, we can collaborate on research, on innovation, and of course exchange of ideas. And if we could somehow build a regional brand manufacturing bit, I think that piece is missing. If we could do that, then it would be helpful. And with COVID around, we have a huge opportunity to also collaborate on PPE, because with PPE fabric coming out of China, I think India would be an easy market for us to import from in terms of PPE fabric. So I think it's important for us to move forward in faith and in trust, and see where it leads us. And of course, World Bank can always be an easy platform for us to drive our agendas together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rubana, for provoking our thinking and also showing a sense of direction on what could be done in terms of building that regional narrative, the regional brand, the regional value chains. So I'll turn now to Swarnim. Share your views, maybe from a Nepal perspective, but looking at the region more broadly.
Thank you, Cecile. Very pleased to join this distinguished panel. Many issues have already been raised by Ambassador Saran and Rubana, but let me emphasize, I think, 5 issues that could be taken up in the short term, leading to the medium and the long term. The first is, as has already been hinted, I think the sharing of pharmaceutical competencies. I think that's a very important issue right now, at a time when the level of trust is low. I think COVID presents an opening to repair this rupture that we're seeing in bilateral relations, and almost a stalemate in the state of regional cooperation, right? So if a COVID-19 vaccine or other efficacious treatments are found, they need to be mass manufactured and distributed at affordable prices. And India is the natural leader to do this. I think globally it has the 3rd largest pharmaceutical capacity, but there are companies like the Serum Institute in Pune, which is the largest vaccine producer. And I'm told, I was reading this New York Times piece that talked about how it's already producing, even before the clinical trials are complete, 500 doses per minute. So millions of doses of this COVID-19 vaccine, spearheaded by the Jenner Institute at Oxford, is already being produced. So how do we, how do people in the region take advantage of this? I think India can really use its good offices, so to speak, to make it available in the region. So here, I think Muhammad Yunus of Bangladesh has floated this idea. It's a resolution that's coming up in the UN General Assembly to declare any vaccine a global public good. Perhaps, of course, if we can afford, we can make it a global public good, but certainly a regional public good, which is universally available, free of commercial ownership, free of patent rights. And there's a nice precedence to all this, right? When the polio vaccine was created in 1965, the creator actually declined a patent. So I think there's a lot that India can do to really jumpstart this burst of goodwill by doing something really humanitarian on a massive scale. The SAARC video conference that India initiated, I think not much has happened through it. So there's already a lot of cynicism on how that was just a show. Perhaps this concept of advanced market commitments, which has been ongoing in the health field for the last 20 years, to guarantee purchase and put money behind it. The Europeans have done it with the $8 billion fund. I think with that SAARC fund of $1 billion or so, this can also send certain signals. In Nepal, our far west and the Midwest, extremely rich in medicinal and aromatic plants. I think there's some kind of a sort of production and processing collaboration that can happen with some of the leading entities in India. Entities like the World Bank can also nudge some cooperation here. So pharmaceutical angle is extremely important, number one, right? Number two, jump-starting economic recovery through trade. Here, I'm not going to emphasize, the usual menu of trade problems that we have. In fact, as LDCs, we do have, at least until now, unfettered access to the Indian market. Tariffs are very low or almost zero. But it's the non-tariff barriers that has often restrained a healthy organic growth of exports from smaller countries. There are two famous cases, export of ginger from Nepal, for example. Every time there's a glut in India, we get stopped. Every time there's a shortage in India, the passes to the Indian market is very, very, very free. Even with Bangladesh, Nepal was picking up on this acrylic and polyester yarn exports through our land route, which is very short from Kakarbitta to Fulbari to Banglaband. And then that was stopped about a decade ago. Now we have to route everything through Kolkata, which renders our competitiveness very. So here, I think the MTB's moratorium for a while. Of course, there's a big distinction, as trade economists like to say, between NTMs, the non-tariff measures, which are often legitimate. It's the non-tariff barriers which need to be taken care of. I think to jumpstart economic recovery through trade, India can take a big position on this. Of course, we can cooperate on meeting Indian quality standards and all that. And there's already a positive goodwill. So I was talking with some energy friends in Nepal who, we've been importing energy from India on the Dhalkebar-Muzaffarpur line. We pay a fixed yearly charge of almost ₹1 billion per year. But because of the lockdown and the rainy surplus, we don't need to import the amount of electricity that we said we would. Yet India has been waiving the penalties because we've been under-importing, right? So there's a goodwill, and it's an energy trade at work where precedents can be formed. Just, I know I'm running out of time. Finally, on financial cooperation, the swaps and the lines of credit that have been emphasized, I think Ambassador Saran talked about this. There's something to be said about upping or increasing the limits on the swap arrangements. I think the ceiling that was set almost 8 years ago was about US dollars 400 million. That can easily be ramped up. And the concessional lines of credit in instances where we face liquidity and balance of payment problems would be something that can be done at a regional level, and that can also instill a lot of confidence. I think there's something to be said about food security. The SAARC Food Bank that currently holds very modest amounts of grain, 500,000 metric tons. I think that can really be substantially ramped up, especially by the larger countries. And finally, the planetary boundaries and this interface with human life. I think there is that ecology and pandemic linkage that has already been highlighted. 75% of the infectious diseases are transmitted from animals to humans. Climate change, long-standing problem, not just the greenhouse gases, but the short-lived climate pollutants, the problem of the black carbon that is almost a regional menace that can have a regional solution. But all these need sort of solid institutions, right? SAARC, BBIN, international agencies like ICIMOD, World Bank, to really forge collaboration to reestablish that original ethos of regional collaboration, which their original raison d'etre of regional cooperation is, we are taking on problems that are too big for individual countries to tackle, and this demands the regional cooperation. And I think the World Bank's RICE initiative can take a lot of the initiatives that I've talked about. So let me stop here for now.
Thank you very much, Swarnim. Let me now turn to Rubana. Rubana, I'd like to hear from you what you think could be some of the short-term opportunities. You did mention a few in your opening remarks, but what are the immediate opportunities?
The immediate opportunities could be direct. You see, Cecile, what happens is mostly the industries, knowledge, and governance. These are three components which never align. Therefore, whenever there's policy making, there's always a lack somewhere because there's never an all-out coordination amongst all the three. So if we really want to, if we mean serious business of collaboration, then we should immediately come together and have the regional think tanks, the industries all around South Asia, and the governments all aligned on the subject. So there has to be a greater agreement, a grander narrative from politically to take this initiative forward, because we could be doing as much as immediate business to business connect, which is actually easy because business, sports, music, youth, these are elements that always keep our skies together. But that's different. Apart from that, to bring an all-out change, it's important that we have the political intent of all the South Asian governments to work together, which is quite a utopia at this point of time, Cecile. So what I'm actually dreaming of is a utopia, and I know we will see, we see it still, all of us see some rainbow somewhere out there, but I'm not too sure or not overly optimistic because so far it has not been the case. But I must give credit to the South Asian Champions Round and many champions who've worked behind closed doors and gotten across lots of great energy deals across borders. So, you know, that has been very, very successful. If we can do it in energy, why can't we do it in ecology or health or manufacturing? I see no handicap there, but the political will is something that's needed. So the big mover here can be Ambassador Swaran, India. And you can move us around, and we'll be happy to collaborate. So I think an immediate attention to political intention to bring South Asia together is needed. Once again, a utopia, but worthwhile dreaming of.
Wonderful. Yes, we all need dreams. So Swarnim, how do we put that dream turn it into reality? What's a longer term vision?
I think in the long term, we really have to get back to the original mission, right? This is really about addressing shared aspirations for prosperity, for mobility and exchange, and to address the common vulnerabilities that we all share: climate change, the Himalayan, the crisis, and all that. So in the long term, hopefully so we're talking about the post-COVID environment where I would really focus on three things, right? So it's, Nepal is the poorest country in Asia after Afghanistan. A lot of the neighboring Indian states of Nepal are also very poor. These are all economic laggards. So for me, as an economist, raising per capita incomes, creating good jobs, and this agenda of prosperity is paramount. We have to get back to that because with poverty come lots of other problems, conflict, instability, and all that. So financing of new sources of economic growth in the post-COVID environment, and financing of growth poles as well, these corridors, clusters that we can engineer, that we can nudge the private parties to really work towards. So in the post-COVID environment, I can see the digitalization agenda coming up as a new source of growth that I think Hart referred to earlier, the adoption, much more ambitious adoption of clean energy, diversification of tourism, high value agriculture. These are all, I think, issues that we could adopt as new sources of growth and jobs. So at the same time, the state has to do its role, right? The policy and the infrastructural impetus that you need to provide to encourage shared production. So we talked about reshoring of global value chains, or even engineering of regional production networks. I think that model will undergo a paradigm shift in the COVID aftermath. But we're not talking about old-fashioned industrial policy here, where hard state intervention is sort of distorting prices and resource allocation. This is more about solving coordination failures in sectors where I think comparative advantages exist and must be encouraged. The issue of concessional finance to fund a lot of these infrastructures, a lot of these urbanization processes, World Bank resources, leverage together with Exim banks, AIIB, and other sources, and PPPs and all that will also be exceptionally important. The second area of the regional agenda has to turn to thinning of obstacles at the border and behind the border. So this is, of course, about the old issue of reducing policy barriers, tariffs and non-tariff barriers, but also to reduce the cost of trade and business, right? This is where the agenda of connectivity that the World Bank has rightly been emphasizing is very important, but we haven't done enough. Digitalization is needed, not especially for the landlocked countries, to lower the cost of participation in the world economy. So thinning of these border and behind the border constraints, there's a whole agenda there. Finally, I think on the shared vulnerabilities bit, it's managing our regional commons. The Himalayan ecosystem that I alluded to earlier, high altitudes warm faster than elsewhere. ECMOD, which is based in Kathmandu, has done this fantastic work on documenting how temperatures have been rising. If the rest of the world see a global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade, the high altitudes in South Asia are likely to see a 0.3 degrees centigrades higher. So this is going to have a catastrophic implications. These earthly ecosystems that exhibit, non-linear responses to very small shocks, but with a small probability of a big catastrophic change. So I think there's a lot of collaboration that should, of course, this is a global project. There's a global endeavor. Paris Climate Accords and all that reflect that. But as I mentioned earlier, the menace of the black carbon, the short-lived climate pollutants, I think can really be tackled at a regional level. So different forms of partnerships, different modes of delivery, different forms of cooperation. I think all these have to be explored in the post-COVID environment where there will be opportunities, as we've talked about, but we're also entering this era of uncertainty. But I would want to end with re-emphasizing the note that let's reclaim that original raison d'etre of regional cooperation and regionalism, where we're taking on issues that are too big for each country to take on in its own right, even for a large country like India. We need to partner and cooperate. Let me stop there, Cecile.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Swarnim, for charting that path forward. So we have about 200 people have joined this webinar. And as you can expect, we have a number of questions that are coming in. A few of the questions express skepticism of regional cooperation integration. And so specifically, the question is, given the region's long history of differences and the lack of progress on regional cooperation so far, why would we believe that post-COVID, there is a renewed opportunity for regional cooperation to succeed in South Asia? I'm going to turn that question over to you, Ambassador Saran. And this, as we've heard, there is a role for India, but there is really a role for all of the nations of South Asia. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by addressing something that Rubana mentioned. Let me assure her that whatever rumors she may have heard about a possible change in policy, I think you should just forget about those rumors. I think there is a great deal of awareness in India that its own economic interests, its own future, its destiny as a major economy is inseparable from the prosperity of its own neighbors. So that's something which is fully sort of appreciated and accepted. How it actually translates into specific policies, that leaves something to be desired. But I think I would like to assure you that on the issue of why regional cooperation is such a fundamental part of any economic strategy that India is thinking about, this is something which is well accepted. This is really the reason why we say neighborhood first policy, because we recognize that unless we are able to have a congenial, subcontinental environment, any hope of India being able to play a larger regional role or a larger global role is simply not possible. So the utopia that you are talking about, I would say that going forward, it's not that there is a lack of dreaming, but I would say today, in addition to that dream, there is compulsion. That you cannot, in fact, as Swarnim said, and you yourself pointed out, the kind of challenges that are lurking around the corner, it is simply not possible for even a large country like India to be able to deal with them without working together with countries in the region. So if we are talking about, as Swarnim said, about the Himalayan ecology, we shared the Himalayas, the Nepal, Bhutan, India, even Pakistan, and Bangladesh, like the, plains of India, are dependent upon the, permanent rivers which emanate from the Himalayas. So all of our destinies are interlinked. So if we do not work together to deal with the crisis facing, the Himalayan ecology, if we do not deal with, as Hart mentioned right in the beginning, the issue of plastic pollution, which is making a dead zone of the Bay of Bengal, these are things that we cannot do alone. That is, so I'm saying it is not just a question of, do we sign up to this utopia? Well, it is not just signing up to the utopia, it is a compulsion that if we do not accept the logic of that, then all of us are going to suffer. So I think I would like to make that point very clear. Why regional cooperation is indispensable. Even if we have had a record of not having done too well with respect to regional cooperation so far, that is no reason to not be able to see why it is actually going to be indispensable for the future. I think we have to just accept that logic. Secondly, let me point out that even though the picture looks rather bleak to people who have been dealing with regional cooperation, let me point out that we have actually made progress. We just spoke about, for example, the regional, sub-regional grid in the eastern part of the subcontinent, linking together Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and India. That has been a success story, and that is still expanding. So we should also take credit for having actually achieved something. Secondly, we are already moving forward quite significantly with, for example, riverine transport. The whole of the eastern part of the subcontinent had, in fact, river transport as the main arteries of transportation and trade. And we are beginning to revive that. And that's a success story. Even in terms of trade, I think it would be fair to say that a number of issues that we were dealing with in the past, we have been able to address them. For example, in having agreements amongst the standards organizations of some of the Southeast Asian countries, so that when goods are passing from one country to another, they don't have to always go through a testing process on the other side of the border. So some progress has been made. Is that enough? Certainly not. I think we have to take this forward. So I would say that the question, why should we believe that regional cooperation is going to be somewhat more positive in the future rather than in the past? I would say there is no alternative to that regional cooperation going forward. And that we have, despite a sort of a negative perception, we have had progress in terms of regional cooperation going forward. So that gives me a certain degree of optimism for the future.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that reassuring view of what's possible going forward. Here's a question for you, Rubana, on micro, small, and medium enterprises that have been extremely hit during this crisis. Are there ways in which regional cooperation could help revive the MSME sector?
Thanks, Cecile. Well, it has been very, very badly impacted. I can only tell you that post-COVID, we have lost over 400 factories. They've just closed down. So it's been impacted very, very heavily. Yes, through regional collaboration, lots of things can happen. For instance, I've been hearing from Indian designers, and I've heard from 3 of them since last week, who want to place small quantities, so 100 pieces per style. And this is all active wear, and they want to place it with the factories. Now in Bangladesh we have large factories, quite large actually, and we can't handle 100 pieces per style, but there are smaller factories who can seize the opportunity. So I see a huge opportunity in the possibility of a regional tie-up of design and manufacturing and then marketing together. So there is a huge opportunity to save these small and medium and micro enterprises through regional collaboration. We just have to speak to one another more and perhaps create a separate platform for this segment, so that we can actively have a regular conversation. And there, like I said, there's no alternative to business dialogue. So more B2B to be encouraged on regional basis, and of course smaller runs, more value addition is more than welcome. And like I said, I mean, India literally buys more than $1.5 billion worth of apparel globally, and we only supply to them a little over 500 million. We still have a chance to grow. So there's a lot of opportunity, and we hope that we'll be able to increase the cross-border communication at this point of time.
So Rubana, let me just ask you a follow-up question. What we've seen in many other regions is that the private sector is actually a driving force for regional integration. What role do you see the private sector in South Asia playing? How can they become a stronger voice in this debate?
Private sector always plays a very critical role in almost everywhere in the world. It's just that private sector and usually is also very well represented in the government. So therefore, the voice of public sector is often very, very strong. In our case, private sector is very strong indeed, but at the same time, the government to government interaction counts much more. And the policymakers ought to realize that there is a need. There's an increasing need from the businesses to connect to businesses cross-border, and that no degree of red tapeism should curb our ambition or our dream. So we need policy support in order to grow beyond just the basic routine. But then again, like I said, Cecile, it's incredibly important for us to realize that businesses can't do much if there are non-tariff barriers. So if the land port is not functioning well, a couple of weeks back, it was so strange that Indian export was just halted by the Indian side, and as a result, we couldn't export anything either. So we came to a complete deadlock for almost 4 days. So these are things which add to the cost of business. This is what holds us back. So these are things that that shouldn't be holding us back. So I'm always a great believer on fast tracking. So if there is any way of doing a fast track, South Asian regional fast track within RICE, it would be very helpful, and then we can perhaps share our concerns outright with all of you pretty honestly and candidly.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is there's really a need for public-private dialogue and private sector to exert some pressure on public, but public to show some responsiveness to the demands of the private sector. So Swarnam, here's a question for you on natural resources. How can more regional and sub-regional cooperation on shared natural resources, such as transboundary rivers, help the South Asia region? Swarnam?
It's my test case of demonstrating the value of regional cooperation, but we politicized the benefited. Ideologically and organically to really four classic national way number one is a particular Nepal. If we can link our Gandaki and Koshi to the Ganges, I think navigability would be exceptionally important to lower the cost of transaction and transport for Nepal. Our Prime Minister has been quite fond of this, but a lot is dependent on what India does, right? It's not a unilateral thing. But the more important, even more important, and something that's already happening here is on energy, clean energy. In an era of climate change, Nepal potentially has this ability to produce, at least 80,000 megawatts of clean hydropower. Because of the seasonal variation that the hydrology demands, we have to trade that. We have surplus in the rainy seasons, deficit in the winter seasons, and I think that variability can only be smoothened with a proper functioning trading regime that we've started with India. Flood control is of immense interest to India, and perhaps we can monetize the value of water so that these quid pro quos can happen. Irrigation, again, damming mighty Himalayan rivers could be of use to India to irrigate much of its barren lands in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. But for this, right now, rivers are almost sacrosanct, highly politicized, and the level of trust is very low. And we've been, there have been incidences in the past which have been perceived to be unequal. This Gandaki Treaty, Koshi Treaty. So it's taken decades to undo that perception of unfairness. But entering into the 21st century, I think the issue of river cooperation can really be taken as a package: flood control, irrigation, navigability, and clean energy generation, where I think win-win outcomes can be forced. And this is where, again, as I said, it's a test case of sub-regional cooperation. And fortunately, in the last few years, what Bhutan and India are doing, what Bhutan and Bangladesh and India are doing, and more recently, actually, it's importation of power from India that ended this crippling decade-long load shedding in Nepal, which I think people grudgingly accept that the value of bilateral exchange, bilateral power trade. We have to make sure that absolutely the vast majority, the silent majority, are convinced that the reciprocal arrangements are to the benefit of both countries, or even the trilateral, or even BBIN level. I think these can be shown.
Great, thank you very much, Swarnim. So I'm going to turn to a topic that has come up a lot in our conversation, which is digital. And the fact is, we live in an increasingly digital world. Without that, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. So what can be done to enhance digital connectivity in South Asia in a manner that expands access and is inclusive? Because that, we know, is a huge, huge issue, is ensuring that we're bringing everyone along and not creating exclusion. And what is the regional dimension to this? I'm going to start with you, Ambassador Saran, and then I'll give our two other panelists an opportunity to come in, because I think this really cuts across all sectors.
Cecile, again, let me make the point that we have so far been able to achieve success through taking advantage of opportunities which are offered. Sometimes these opportunities come out of crisis. Secondly, we have followed the practice of trying to make incremental kind of changes and then build on that. And I think we are really at one such moment, because the pandemic itself has been forcing us, even if we do not wish to go in that direction. This pandemic is actually forcing us to depend more and more on the digital domain. So there is no alternative to that. Even dealing with the current COVID crisis, we have to depend more and more on the digital side. Now, the good news is that quite a lot of engagement is taking place amongst South Asian countries at different levels, whether it is at the governmental level, health officials, for example, after the online summit, health officials have met on the digital framework. We have had other conversations digitally, not only amongst government officials, but we have also had such engagement among, say, think tanks. I have participated in some of the webinars, for example, held by some think tank in Nepal. So those conversations are taking place, and they are pointing to the future, that we can actually transcend the borders that we have through the digital space. Now, here infrastructure is certainly an issue. And I think this is where having some kind of designing some kind of a digital infrastructure plan for the subcontinent in the manner that, for example, we have worked on the power side. That's a good example which can be actually followed in developing the digital infrastructure as well. Not all countries may wish to take part in it immediately. Let us start with those who are happy to take part in such a design and creating that infrastructure. In India, we are very much using the digital space for example, for education. And I think you and Hart talked about how human resource development is going to be a very important part of the World Bank's agenda, regional agenda. Now, can we do that in the current situation and even going forward without really developing the digital space and e-education? Probably not. Just as on the health side, we are turning more and more to the digital side, in education also we will have to do the same thing. A lot of work is happening in India, but I also see that a lot of work on this, even if it is on a limited scale, which is happening in Nepal, which is happening in Bangladesh, certainly in Sri Lanka, there is really no reason why we cannot create a platform where we can pull together some of these experiences. So this is certainly a area going forward, which could be a very, very positive, platform for regional cooperation. That's what I feel.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Rubana, digital is absolutely essential for businesses to operate. What's your perspective on this?
Very clearly, Cecilia, I think we need an e-South Asia. So it's just not a question of just digital business. It's not a question of just e-commerce, which is actually pretty vibrant in South Asia. Bangladesh literally has 150 million cell phone users, 95 million connected to net all the time. So it's important for us to realize that, in an era where 3D printing, sampling are all being done globally, worldwide, it's important for us to understand that anything and everything is possible by just E. So it's important for us to perhaps come up with the concept of a regional virtual marketplace so that we can go from business to consumer directly, instead of Western brands taking advantage of buying at very, very low prices. We could perhaps concentrate on some kind of a marketing collaboration, so that we would be able to e-market ourselves with online increase in sales, especially after COVID. Nobody wants to go to a physical marketplace anyway. So, and there's a question of health also. I think telemedicine has been so effective in Bangladesh. Even for our garment workers, we've opted for telemedicine with 3 companies almost. So that has been helping also. So it's a question of e-monitoring, e-learning, e-transfer of resources. And I think that, a virtual marketplace honestly would really, really help us. So digitally, we must be connected, because at this point of time, COVID literally has rendered us helpless, and physical borders no more exist. And then we've all gone on with our lives, and we are all kind of bouncing back with whatever we have, and it's only the e-platform that we're depending on. So digital collaboration is absolutely key for us, and I believe that we've had a very, very effective South Asian Champions round on digital connectivity a couple of months ago. I think we can follow up on that as well. Ambassador Swaran, if you remember, we were all there together. So maybe we can have a follow-up discussion on this also. Thank you.
Thank you, Rubana. So we have time for one last question. And Swarnan, since you already addressed digital, I'm going to put this question to you. This is a very interesting question on human capital and portability of skills. So this person asks, what are the possibilities of establishing a skills testing and certifying authority that could assess and categorize people's skills levels across sectors, leading to generally accepted certification that could be used for jobs across South Asia? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a very intriguing question. I haven't actually heard this before, but it's certainly very consistent with the idea of regionalism, where the European market, the European common market, you started with tariffs and non-tariff barriers, then the capital movement, then the labor movement, and then now you are even talking about some kind of economic and a political union, right? So, so these are, a textbook sort of stepping blocks towards greater integration and greater cooperation. Certainly, I mean, labor movement, there's different pairings of stories. So India, Nepal is, well, Nepal to India is free. We don't need visas. The borders are kind of unregulated. Indians coming into Nepal, there's some restriction. With other countries, I think the regime is much tighter. So I think it's definitely a very good idea. And I think as a large country with a big endowment of skilled people, its competencies in IT, in health, in higher education, I think India is definitely well equipped to start this. But there will be a concern about the asymmetry, right? India is so large, looms so large in the region that, after this testing and certification, does it mean that a lot of the Indians will be coming to a smaller economies like Bhutan and Nepal to take over the jobs? So I think these safeguards have to be put in place. Remember, the BBIN Motor Vehicles Agreement, all signed and sealed, was ready to be implemented, but Bhutan at the end got cold feet and pulled out of this. So I think this very real political implications emanating from the asymmetry that we live with in South Asia has to be handled. But as an intellectual topic, as a policy prescription to take forward and to experiment with in a sequenced manner, maybe we can start with certain vocations, right? Maybe 4 or 5 skills: plumbers, electricians, pharmaceutical personnel, and then let's try it out. And if there is great receptivity to these kind of universalization or regionalization of accreditation and skill testing, then build upon it. But we can't do it in a big bang way because of the asymmetry that I talked to. But certainly with 2 or 3 less controversial professions and skills, I think we can try it out.
Great, thank you. So we're coming to the end of this event. We've had many more questions, and I apologize in advance to all of those who posed questions. We will do our best to answer some of these on the live chat within 24 hours. Let me try to bring this to an end by pulling out some of certainly the key themes that I have heard. I think the one takeaway for me is that we've all recognized that these big global problems, be they COVID, be they climate change and the resulting natural disasters that occur in this region, they do require a coordinated global and regional approach. And that is important to protect the most vulnerable and to help South Asian countries relaunch their economies in a way that's socially and environmentally equitable. What we know is that when countries try to protect their own and focus on national approaches, the risk is really that this will only increase the severity and the duration of the economic downturn. What I heard loud and clear from all of you is that regional cooperation is not just a nice to have. It is, as Ambassador Saran said, it's a compulsion. There is no alternative. The magnitude of the challenges requires countries to work together. No single country can go it alone, even India, the largest country of South Asia. And I think that Ambassador Saran reiterated that India is, its destiny is inseparable from the prosperity of its neighbors. And this neighborhood first approach is very much at the core of that. So what COVID brings is opportunities in areas that we had probably never thought of in the past: vaccine development, health, e-health, digital applications in multiple sectors, in education and business and in customs and trade facilitation. But it's also important, as we address these new challenges and opportunities, that we don't lose focus from the core of the regional integration agenda. And I think many of you have alluded to what that core is. It is about opening borders. It is about facilitating cross-border trade. It is about harnessing the current agreements in place, such as SAFTA. It is about strengthening institutions in the region, and it is about favoring movement of people, goods, and also looking at that very, very important agenda around resilience. Resilience facing the types of challenges we see today with COVID, but really that looming climate change agenda, which we see, and we've seen it already in the past few months. We've seen the combination of pandemic and monsoons and locusts. And so how do countries come together? Because those challenges, just like the pandemic, know no borders, and they don't just stop at a border and ask for a visa to come in. So those are the types of activities and challenges where regional cooperation will be absolutely essential. And I think that what this conversation highlighted is that we can't be naive. We know that the challenges are significant. There are political tensions. There are historical differences. There are regional institutions that might not be well equipped today to tackle all these challenges. But I also leave this conversation with a sense of optimism that despite all of these challenges, we have made great progress. We can point to several areas, be it harmonization of standards, be it electricity transmission, inland waterways, and the list goes on. So we do have some good examples to point to. And so I do leave from this conversation very much reinforced in my convictions that this agenda is absolutely essential to recovery and that there is a way forward. And it will require political will, as Rana reminded us several times during this conversation. It will require public and private working together. It will require that dialogue between industry, government, and academia and think tanks. And of course, we at the World Bank, and I know that I speak also for my colleagues in other MDBs, the Asian Development Bank in particular, which is very keen on this agenda, we all stand committed to this agenda with the backing of our development partners. So with this, let me bring this event to a close. Thank our three speakers very, very much. This was a wonderful conversation. It has been recorded if any of the participants would like to rewatch it or share it with others. And please stay tuned because we are committed to having this as a regular series of discussions. We're looking forward to our next event in November. Thank you all very, very much. Have a good day, a good afternoon, and a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.